Let's use a plastic cup, some scissors, some yarn, and some beads to make something really awesome. Today we're going to begin to make yarn weaving cups. The first thing you're going to do is turn your cup over to the bottom and write your first and last name with a Sharpie. Just write it as best you can over these bumpy little letters, and then turn it back to the front. And you're going to look for these 3 little dots of Sharpie on the side of your cup, or maybe on the top where the lip is. Okay, and once you find those, you're going to be using some scissors to cut. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cut a straight line down from where that dot is all the way down to this last little bump on your cup, or this last little ridge. We're not going to cut all the way to the bottom of the cup. We're going to try to stop our scissors right here on this last little bump. So be careful and go slowly, and be careful when you're cutting over these bumpy textures here. This is what I like to do is I like to make my first cut, and we're going to be using the big scissors actually. Start on that first dot and just make sure you try to cut as straight as you can. Make one cut and then just stop and take a breath, take a break, so you can kind of feel and observe how the cup is doing, okay? It's gonna bend a little bit, it's gonna be noisy, it's gonna take a little bit of effort to get over this bump, and then it's gonna cut really easy. So slow down, okay? Go really slow. Then put the scissors back in and try your best to keep cutting in a straight line, one cut at a time, and then try to keep those scissors in there and just try to stop right before, or when you get really close to that little edge right there, and then stop. If it's a little bit above the edge because you're afraid, a little bit above that bump because you're afraid it might go too far, that's okay too. So I made a really good cut. Yours might be a little crooked because I've been cutting these more than once. Okay, we're gonna do it again. Find another dot, make one cut, kind of stop and position your hands and just get ready. And then just keep cutting down. It might be kind of hard once you get your scissors, your hands like over this little bump here at the top of the cup. So you might be making like little small cuts like this once you get to the bottom. And then we're going to do that one more time. Make an initial cut. Try to keep it straight. If your cup bends a little bit, that's okay. And then put it back in there, or keep it there if you're comfortable. And then just make some little cuts until you get right close to that little bottom bump. Okay, I stopped a little bit above my bump. I'm confident that I can cut it a little bit closer, but if you want to stop there, that would be fine too. You might even want to like move your hands around so you can kind of hold on to the little side if you want to make one more little snip, and then I'm definitely stopping right there. I'm going to show you how to measure your yarn. Grab the color you want, grab the end of the yarn or the little tail, and let the big spool fall to the ground. Wrap it around your elbow in your hand and grabbing it at the top with your fingers 5 times. 5 times around your elbow and your arm. Take it off of your arm and cut it yourself, or ask a neighbor for help. Cut it right close to that loop, and then that is how long each piece of your yarn will be while you're weaving. The next thing we want to do is position our yarn, okay? So I know you can't see it. I can't really zoom out that much, but you want to straighten your yarn out so that it's horizontal on your table. So you want to just spread it out. Here's the tail, and I even might have to move that to the floor if I need to. And I want to find the middle of my yarn, okay? So I'm going to find where I think the middle is, and then I'm going to measure it, okay? So I'm going to find the ends and just make sure the ends are even. I'm going to turn the camera around real quick and just show you what I'm talking about, because you might have to let your yarn lay on the floor to do this because it's so long. So I'll show you how to do that, and that way you can do the same. We want to find the middle of our string by making sure that our 2 tails are even. If one's a little bit longer than the other, try to make them as even as you can, like this, and then you'll grab the other end where it folds together. That's the middle. All right, once you've found the middle of your yarn, you're going to hold on to it, and you're going to actually place it inside your cup in between 2 cuts, okay? So these are called the warps. Warps are vertical lines when you're doing any kind of weaving. So these cuts right here are the warps. So you're going to place the middle of your thread in between 2 warps, or 2 cuts. And then you're going to gently pull the thread down to the bottom of the cup like this, okay? And then you can let the rest of your thread hang down in your lap or on the floor, okay? Now, let's talk about a couple things that's very important. First of all, you need to tighten your yarn so that it's really tight and it goes all the way to the bottom where your scissors stopped. Don't let it hang out up here. Make sure you pull it gently. Now, if you yank on it, it may rip the cup and make that cut longer, so you don't want to do that. So gently tug on it. And also, the yarn on the inside should be nice and tight, okay? So if it is loose like this, we don't want that. We don't want a wavy line. If that happens, just tug on the left or the right, okay? And at the same time, you're going to try to make sure your yarn stays even. So remember those two tails that were even. If it's not perfect, that's okay. If one's a little bit longer than the other, it's okay. Just make sure they're pretty close to being even. If you need to tug on one side to make one piece longer than the other, you can do that. Okay, once your yarn is in place, we're going to grab the yarn to the right. So here's our cup. We're facing, this is facing us, the part where the yarn is. It's not turned around to the empty cut. Make sure it's turned so you can see the yarn hanging out of both sides. Right side is where we're going to start. Right side is where we're going to grab. So we're going to grab it with our hands and then move the yarn around because it's kind of fallen all over because it's really long, and it's going to get shorter as we go. But you're going to begin by wrapping the yarn around the side of the bottom of the cup like this. And every time you see a cut or a warp, you're going to tuck it in there and in the next one, kind of like we did on the very first step. After you do that, push your yarn down like we did the first time. Make sure that it is never hanging up like this or never like a wavy line. It needs to be tight. So you're going to tug on it first, and then you're going to push it down into the cracks and then tug on it again. You might have to do this a couple times. This is called packing. We want a nice tight piece, okay? Now, if you look on the inside, it looks like this, okay? We have two diagonal lines coming together at a point. If you turn it this way, it looks like a V. That way you know you did it correctly. Two pieces of your yarn are now coming out of the same warp or the same cut. That's how you know you did it correctly. Let's see that very first important step one more time. Right, so here's our cup. We're facing, this is facing us, the part where the yarn is. It's not turned around to the empty cut. Make sure it's turned so you can see the yarn hanging out of both sides. Right side is where we're going to start. Right side is where we're going to grab. So we're going to grab it with our hands and then move the yarn around because it's kind of fallen all over because it's really long, and it's going to get shorter as we go. But you're going to begin by wrapping the yarn around the side of the bottom of the cup like this. And every time you see a cut or a warp, you're going to tuck it in there and in the next one, kind of like we did on the very first step. After you do that, push your yarn down like we did the first time. Make sure that it is never hanging up like this or never like a wavy line. It needs to be tight. So you're going to tug on it first, and then you're going to push it down into the cracks and then tug on it again. You might have to do this a couple times. This is called packing. We want a nice tight piece, okay? Now, if you look on the inside, it looks like this. Okay, we have two diagonal lines coming together at a point. If you turn it this way, it looks like a V. That way you know you did it correctly. Two pieces of your yarn are now coming out of the same warp or the same cut. That's how you know you did it correctly. Moving on, you're going to grab that same piece. If you're not sure which is which, it's the one a little bit higher because we crossed over one of them, okay? And this one is the one we're working with. We're going to keep working with this one until we're done weaving with it, and then we'll work on this one. So we're not touching this one right now. Same thing, we're going to the right. So we're wrapping around the bottom of the cup, and when you see a cut or a warp, you're going to stop, tuck it in, okay? Push the yarn down. Turn it and check this side, push it down. And after you do, when you do your second one, you're going to see this yarn, and you're going to see your old piece from earlier, and they're going to start to lay on top of each other. Here is a preview of the yarn laying on top of each other, okay? So that's what we're creating. After you put it in there, check the inside. Remember, nothing should be saggy, wavy, or loose. If it is, find out where it's coming from and tug on it gently, not so hard that you rip the cup. Okay, and your yarn should be nice and straight or nice and tight. The inside too. Now it's making a triangle. That's another way you know you're doing it correctly if you have a triangle. Now, here's a tip. Do not tug on your yarn so tight that the cup starts to curl like this. It should still have a shape of a cup, okay? So you're gonna have some gaps like right here and right here, but it shouldn't be all curled up like this. It's too tight. If you did that, now you're going to go backwards with your string to the left, like pull on a piece of yarn and tug on it until it's not so tight anymore, okay? And then before you move on, check to make sure. I'm going to have to put my hand inside and really push that thread down into the crack, okay? So that it's all the way down. And then we're going to keep going. I'm using my string to the right, okay? If I'm not sure which string is which or which yarn I'm using, this one we're not using because it's all the way at the bottom, okay? Remember, our yarn is going to start to lay on top of each other. So I'm using this one. I know this is the one I need because it's kind of up. It's higher than the rest. So I'm going to keep going. Also, if I check my yarn, this one is getting shorter. So the shorter one is what we're using first. And I have one more side of the cup that doesn't have any yarn wrapped. So I'm going to wrap, stop here, and tuck it in there. Now, if you skip this, you're going to have a skip in your pattern of weaving and it's going to be incorrect. And you're going to, it's going to look really funny at the end when we are finished or when we start to get to the middle part. So make sure you don't skip. None of the cracks should be covered with a piece of yarn. It should always be tucked in like that and in the next one like this. Push the thread, the yarn down, and then tug, okay? Make sure that your triangle stays tight. Now, since we have 3 cuts, we're always going to have a triangle on the inside. If you don't have a triangle, you did something wrong and we need to reevaluate. If you accidentally are weaving, let's say you're weaving like this and you skipped some and you notice, then undo it. Go backwards a few steps until you found the problem, okay? If you're getting to the very top and you notice these problems at the bottom, it's not going to be fun to redo the whole thing, but it's so much easier if you fix the problems at the beginning. Even if you don't think you're going to have time or you're going to get behind, you're going to be fine to catch up. Fix your problems when you see them. Then we're going to keep going to the right, okay? So another time, wrapping, and this time I have 2 yarn that are going to lay on top of each other. That's what's going to happen as we move on. I'm tucking it in the first cut that I see, or the first warp that I see, and I am pushing them down into the warp. Okay, now my cuts are vertical and my yarn is starting to get horizontal. This is called the weft, okay? Wefts and warps are 2 things you need when you're weaving. So we're using these 2 things to make that inside-outside pattern, okay? I'm gonna keep going until my thread is a little bit too short, and when it's too short to be wrapped around the cup, I'm gonna show you how to tuck it in. So I'm gonna go a little bit faster. You're gonna go very slow. I'm going to show you normal speed for a couple of more wraps and then I'll speed it up and you can work on your own. Every time you see a cut, you stop and tuck. If you ever need to go on the inside and adjust some things, you can. Just be careful when you're putting your hand in there not to split the cup so that these cuts get longer. Then tug. Make sure the triangle's always nice and tight and straight, and make sure your thread's here. If any of them are ever hanging down like that, okay, you can go on the inside and tug on one of the triangles and it'll tighten up. Just keep tugging on a different side of the triangle until you see the loose thread get tight, okay? Now, if you have little snags in your cup, little pieces of plastic, if it's a little tiny one, you might wanna pull on it, or actually it'd be better if you just cut it. So if you do see a snag, you can trim it. If it's a little snag like that, it's bothering you, you can do that. If it's not bothering you, I would just leave it alone. Okay, a bigger snag would be on this cup. I had like a big chunk right here and I trimmed it as best I could, and then I just couldn't really trim it anymore. So I just had to, every time I got to that warp, I just had to be careful so that my yarn didn't get stuck, and it was pretty annoying, but it worked out fine. To the right, tuck every time. This is called packing. Okay, not like packing a suitcase. Packing means pushing things down and making sure everything's nice and tight and making sure the threads lay on top of each other straight and there are no gaps like this. And make sure they go all the way down into the warps as much as I can. That way, again, everything will be nice and neat and nice and straight, laying on top of each other when you get to the middle of your cup and to the top. All right, I'm gonna let you work at your own pace after you watch me finish this step with this first piece of yarn. Okay, I got to a point where I have a piece of yarn that's about a little bit longer than my finger, okay? And if I wrap it around again and tuck it in the next warp that I see, it's not long enough to come out the other side. So when that happens, you just leave it in there, okay? And it kind of hangs out there, and we're just gonna wrap it around one of the ends of the triangle. We're not gonna tie a knot, we don't need to do that. We're just gonna wrap it around. So you're gonna just stick your hand in there, and you're just gonna kind of take the thread and wrap it around one of the sides of the triangle. You might have to lift some of the threads in the triangle because you can't, you don't need to go all the way to the bottom. I can't really show you that because my hand's gonna be in the way, but I'll zoom in when I'm done. And I just pulled it 2 or 3 times. And I'm just like tugging up on it, okay? And I want you to look and see how I wrapped it. Okay, I just wrapped it around the triangle. I went 2 or 3 pieces of thread below the top and just wrapped it around a few times. And that's all. You don't need to tie it because we're gonna keep moving forward and this yarn is gonna pack it in place or keep it in place. Remember that word packing we're using. Okay, so once that side's done, now it's time to work on this one, and now it's long like the first one, and we're gonna keep doing the same steps over and over. The only difference is you're gonna see we're moving to the right still, and every time we use that second piece of yarn, it is gonna cross over all these old ones, and that's just fine. It's just gonna look like that. So it's gonna cross over one time, and when you see a warp, you stop and tuck. Make sure you stop also and pack. Push them down into the cracks of the cup. As you get used to this and you feel like you're getting better at it and you're going faster, please don't go so fast that you forget to tuck every time. Don't just start wrapping, and never like do a bunch of wraps like this ahead of time. Can't do that. You'll have big problems later. So you need to do one at a time. So stop, tuck, pull, tuck. Check on your triangle to make sure you have no droopy pieces of yarn. Okay, we're always moving to the right, and we're always packing or pushing our threads down every time and then tugging. We're not doing 2 or 3 wraps. We're doing one section at a time. Stop, use your fingers, push, 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 tug, tug, tug. We're always moving to the right. I'm gonna keep going again, speed it up, and then I'm gonna wrap this yarn around the inside of my triangle when it's about too short to wrap another rotation. All right, again, I got to a point where my yarn is too short, and instead of leaving it tucked in, I just want to show you if you kept going and you get to a point where you cannot tuck it in the next warp and it's hanging out, it goes back inside. All right, and it just hangs out there for a second, but we want to tighten it first. So I'm going to put my hand in there and I'm going to just pull on the top of the thread that's loose, tighten it so that this edge is tight like that. And then I like to hold it in place with one finger and then find one side of the triangle and just wrap it around a few times. It's going to be kind of hard for you to see, but I'll show you at the end and I'll try to explain what I'm doing. So I go under 2 or 3 pieces of thread and then tug on it so that it's tight. Again, put it under 2 or 3 pieces of thread, tug on it, pull it to the top, and then do that about 3 or 4 times. You're gonna have to stick your hand in there and just be careful that you're not widening your cup. This is giving me trouble, so be patient with yourself. Okay, now, see how it's wrapped around like that? And we're stopping here today. I cannot wait to see you continue, and I love the way they are looking so far. Great job.